Machine learning is an algorithm implementation of statistical methods for approximations and predictions. So, as I told you earlier, that the basics of machine learning algorithms relies on the statistical models or the statistical and probabilistical methods, right? So, initially, the relational data or the structured data was being analyzed by the statistical methods, and we have an implementation of those statistical methods which are in a more advanced and complex form, and that is in the shape of machine learning algorithms, and we are using those algorithms for approximations and predictions. So on a bigger picture, the machine learning algorithms are being used for certain tasks, right? So they can be used for classification, they can be used for regression, clustering. So let's have a look, a brief look in all of these categories. If we talk about the classification, then classification means that we are trying to identify that which category an object belongs to, right? For example, if we have three categories x, y, and z, and we have an object a, then we are interested to see that whether a belongs to x, or a belongs to y, or a belongs to z, right? So we are basically trying to identify the class of an unknown instance, right? So this is the basic target of classification. The applications of classifications can be spam detection, image recognition, or maybe image detection, and there are a number of machine learning algorithms which can be used to perform classification, such as support vector machines, k nearest neighbors, random forest. These are some of the algorithms which can be used to perform classification. And a classification can be a binary classification, or it can also be a multi-class classification. In binary classification, we basically try to divide the input data set into two classes. On the other hand, in multi-class classification, we try to divide the data into more than two classes. But both these categories belongs to classification, and we use these algorithms such as support vector machines, nearest neighbors, and random forests in order to do the classification. The next thing is to perform regression. Regression means to predict a continuous value attribute associated with an object, right? So here it is a little bit different from the classification, because in regression we are not doing the classification of instances, we are trying to predict the value, right, or that is associated to an object. And there are numerous applications of regressions, such as drug response, or regression has its applications in stock market prediction, where people try to predict the stock market based on the regression analysis. And there are also a number of algorithms which can perform regression, such as ridge regression, lasso regression. And I told you that regression can also be of two different types. We perform linear regression if there is linearity in the data set, or we can also perform logistic regression, right? So depending upon the input data set, we can perform the regression. The third thing is to perform clustering, right? So classification and regression are mostly related to the supervised learning domain. On the other hand, clustering is basically related to the unsupervised learning domain. So in supervised learning domain, we have the labeled data, right? We are provided about the labels or the actual outcomes of the input samples. But on the other hand, in clustering or in unsupervised learning, we don't have labeled data, we have unlabeled data, right? So the actual labels of the data samples are not known to us. So that's why we perform clustering here. So in clustering, the target is to perform the automatic grouping of similar objects into sets, right? So we want to group together, or we want to cluster together all the objects which are similar in nature which have some kind of similarity in their characteristics, right? And we usually use some kind of similarity measures in order to determine the similarity between different objects. And the applications of clustering are customer segmentation and grouping, experiment outcomes, and many other applications. And the most commonly used algorithms related to clustering are the k-means clustering, spectral clustering, right? So we will be discussing all those algorithms in detail. Another thing is about the dimensionality reduction, right? So if we sometimes it happens that the dimension of the input data set is too high, and we need to reduce the dimension of the data, and that is basically normally termed as dimensionality reduction. So it means to reduce the number of random variables to consider, right? Because once we have some reduced dimension of the data, then it is easy to retain, it is easy to process. And the applications of dimensionality reductions are visualization, increased efficiency. So there are different optimization techniques which we usually do in dimensionality reduction. So the most commonly used algorithm to perform dimension reduction is PCA, which is called principal component analysis. And we also use some feature selection strategies. We also use non-negative matrix factorization in order to perform the dimension reduction. Another important thing in machine learning is about the model selection, right? So it means that comparing, validating, and choosing parameters and models, right? Because each model can have a number of parameters, and we need to select or the most important parameters or models. So this comes under the category of model selection. So in model selection, the goal is to have improved accuracy via parameter tuning, right? So if I talk about neural networks, in neural networks we usually need have millions of parameters, especially if I talk about a deep neural network, and these parameters need to be tuned efficiently if I want to have good performance of my algorithm, or if I want to have higher accuracy rates. So in that case, it will comes under the model selection category, and it includes algorithms such as grid search, cross validation, etc. The last thing in important thing in machine learning is the pre-processing step, right? Pre-processing normally involves feature extraction and normalization. Also, if our acquired data or the data which we want to process through machine learning, if it is not in a good shape, or if it is not of a good quality, then we employ a number of pre-processing techniques so that we can bring it to a certain quality level, right? So depending upon the data, if it is some imagery or some video data, then there are different pre-processing techniques. If it is some textual or numerical data, then we have some different pre-processing techniques, but these mainly include feature extraction and normalization. Also, there are a number of applications which use pre-processing techniques, such as transforming input data such as text, or that can be used with machine learning algorithms, right? And it has modules including pre-processing and feature extraction.